Let's start. We're all set and we can start our works. Good morning. Good morning to all of you. A warm welcome to all of you, to those that are here with us and those connected via streaming. I would like to thank the whole organization and Mr. Andrea Fiorini in particular. So he's really done a great job to organize this conference. I'm really proud to host you here at our conference, which is called Share, a Way Towards Carbon Farming, here at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Piacenza. It's really an honor for me to host you here. We wanted to have farmers, experts, the academic world, the entrepreneurs, and all the researchers that have to do with carbon farming and carbon credits. We do have a lot of questions on this topic. So actually, this conference wants to be the launch of the Living Lab in Italy. Share is its name within the Horizon project, Lila's for Soils, and we will dive into it later on during the conference and the roundtable. So we wanted to have all of these stakeholders with us today to discuss together. It's the first time for us that we share all of this, and also we try, and by doing so, fostering all of the topics that will be dealt with in our conference. It's a very important moment. We're aiming at climate neutrality by 2050, we as European Union, and with the new regulation, the 3012, you have it in the folder that was handed out to you. Well, with this regulation regarding all of the different issues, carbon culture, carbon storage, and many other issues, all of this is dealt with through new strategies to be defined with all of the stakeholders in the supply chain, so that our agriculture can be more and more sustainable. We can say regenerative farming, or conservative farming. I mean, farming as it should be, and the academic world, I think, is the right sort of place for the proper setting up of a new way of farming. In the introductory speeches for this conference, we have actually two different working planes. So on one side, the carbon farming, there it is. So carbon farming, or a series of integrated farming practices towards tackling with climate change, mitigating climate change on one side, and then the execution part for the project through Living Labs. It's a shared initiative, that of the Living Labs. We will hear from speakers later on what these Living Labs are, but we're going to share different proposals in terms of the design, experimenting out and testing new farming practices. Actually, they're not that new. It's just a matter of applying what we've been teaching in the agronomics world for some years. It's just a way of proper implementing them into systems and within a framework. So on one side, mitigation of climate change, participating in it through carbon farming, and on the other side, enhancing the agroecological role of these farming systems. This is the first time since the Horizon project was launched that we try and put all of the stakeholders together, and the first time that we discussed together on the ideal ways to do so. And of course, regenerative farming is also another key term. There's no shared definition for it. So you'll probably find a series of targets, the key principles, the benefits that we're expecting from this regenerative farming. You will also see that all of the different practices that we will co-design together and that are to be put in place by the farmers are not that easy to put in place, but are certainly so important from an agro-environmental viewpoint. And I leave you with this picture that summarizes the concept. So health of the soil, taking care of the soil towards carbon farming. And I showed this with the opposite of carbon farming. What you see here in this slide is a warning for all of us. If we don't take care of the soil, we lose organic substance, carbon, and money. So thank you very much. Let's all together review our farming systems towards sustainability. I wish you a very fruitful work this morning with us. And now, Sonia, the floor is yours. Good morning, I'm Sonia Pitozzi, and I work for AIT Food, and just a couple of words on AIT Food. We are a European level organization. We are part of the Innovation and Technology Institute, and our task is to build an innovation community, the agro-farming industry, a community that is dynamic and that tries and put together all of the stakeholders so that we can work together around the table. We have 3 different regions, and I'm representing here today the southern region. And you see our region covers up the whole Mediterranean area. So that's for soils, as we said, is using the system of the living labs, fostering participation, because we want really to transform the system, and we can do so only by working with the farmers, those that actually work with the soil, so that we can have a long-lasting change. The list for soils is focusing on the whole Mediterranean area. And as you see on the map, we have different living labs, one in Spain and Portugal, and then in the southern of France, and then northern Italy, Greece, and Israel. And our living lab is the first in that country. These are also pioneers in the mission soil of the EU. So we are collaborating also with other stakeholders, trying and understanding how to use at best the Living Lab approach for a long-lasting change in the system. We will test 100 sites. For the time being, we have pre-selected 50 of them, and there will be a call to select other 50 farmers that want to co-create with us, test and monitor the carbon farming techniques. And also, we should not forget the fact that agriculture is a business, and we will have to check whether these practices are also sustainable from an economic viewpoint. We have already selected 19 carbon farming practices, and a part of our job will also be to validate such practices with the selected farmers, trying and understanding what we should do in concrete on the field. We launched the project last September, and in these 2 weeks, we are now launching all of the different individual living labs. Today, we're pleased to be here to launch Share, and I'll leave the floor to my colleagues. Thank you very much, Sonia. And now we can start our conference. We will start from general issues, and then we will focus on specific issues. So let's start from the legislation of the European Union. And so let's give the floor to DG Agri of the European Union to hear from them what's going on in terms of carbon removals. Actually, I'm Italian, so I'll speak in Italian. So it's still not time to switch to English, but my slides are in English. Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Valeria Forlin. I'm Deputy Head of Unit at the DG Klima, so the department of EU that focuses on climate and climate change. In my unit in particular, we deal with farming, forests, and their impact on climate change. As a solution to climate change, as an area where we can really absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. And of course, we're trying also and reducing greenhouse effect gases. So we deal with trying and mitigating. So I hear an echo. Okay, so we are in charge for the LULUCF regulation, land use change and forestry. This is the use, so we are focusing on the use of land and use of forests, which is so important for carbon removal. So we actually set therefore some targets for that. So we deal with that. Another thing we deal with is the 3012 regulation, which is a certification framework for carbon removal and carbon farming. And actually, I will focus more on this second topic in my presentation. So this regulation that was entered into force last December is creating certification framework for carbon removes carbon farming in Europe. Actually, there are already different standards in the world to certify these carbon credits, but all of these standards follow different rules. So those that buy these credits, and also for the farmers that want to sell them, it's a bit confusing because you don't know which are the most trustworthy standards. So we wanted to have harmonized rules in Europe so that we could provide more certainty to this market and more robustness to the market. As for the scope of the certification framework, it's not just carbon farming, but also all of those technologies that help us in absorbing, so in removing carbon. So soil emissions reductions. For example, we're talking about peatlands. We can reduce these emissions. So we can reduce through re-wetting of peatlands, or we can reduce emissions linked to nitrogen, so fertilizers in the soil. And then there are other techniques that we can use, that of regenerative farming, for example, in terms of carbon farming sequestration. As for the livestock emission reductions, nitrogen dioxide, for example, all of those emissions are due to the digestion of cattle, or methane due to livestock. That part is still not in the scope, but next year we will have to assess whether to include this part or not. And then we have the category of carbon storage in buildings, i.e. using biomaterials, materials with a biogenic source, mainly based on wood, for long-term usage in the building industry. And the last category is that of the permanent removals. We call them permanent to distinguish them from carbon farming. Here we're talking about technologies that capture and store carbon under earth. I have some difficulties in talking in Italian sometimes. I don't know the Italian words. But carbon capture and storage, you store carbon in, for example, empty gas storages. It's all okay, no worry, no worry. No worry. So these are all of the categories that are part of our certification framework. Now we will focus more on carbon farming, but it was just to let you know that there are also other categories. What do we have in this regulation, and what should be also there? So first of all, we have the quality criteria to assess whether this carbon removal is robust enough. So of course you will have to quantify carbon removal, and the activity must be based on additionality, i.e. it should go beyond the law prerequisites, and it has to go beyond the current state of art. So you need a bit of an effort to do so. Then there must be a liability in case carbon is released into the atmosphere. And also, very important for carbon farming is the fact that all activities must respect the environment, so they cannot affect negatively other objectives, and they can also bring benefits to biodiversity and soil health principles. So these are all the quality general criteria, but now we will write down more precise methods that can be used, specific ones, and our new regulation will focus on that, depending, of course, on the base regulation, the CF. So that is our work for next year. So we will confront with an expert group to write down all of the methods in detail. And then we have the certification process. Also in this case, we have general rules in the base regulation. So that we state that such certification schemes ought to be independent. The certification body also has to be an independent one. We have to have transparent and inclusive procedures. So all of the rules that are set ought to be respected. And once the Commission recognizes these certification schemes, these schemes can start their certification activity. We are also writing down specific guidelines for that. And the third pillar is the registry. The registry where all of the carbon removal units or emission reduction units will be included. So we now have sometimes we will be starting from 28, so the register will be put in place in 2028. And through this register, of course, we will try and avoid any fraud. As for the methods, we are writing down 3 different ones. We're focusing on 3 different ones. So agricultural soils and agroforestry, and one on planting of trees on abandoned ground or farming ground. And the last area is that of the peatland re-wetting, so stopping the drainage of organic soils so that we can reduce carbon emissions coming from such soils. We have already a draft that is ready, that we shared with our group of experts last October. We received feedback from them, and we're now working on a more advanced draft. In Berlin, a conference has been organized on carbon farming, a 3-day conference, and I do hope we'll get further feedback in terms of our methodologies. And then in May, there will be expert group meetings, and only the experts belonging to this group can interact in the conference, but it'll be online and everyone can follow the works of these meetings. And hopefully after these first steps, we hope to be ready, September, October, and start the public consultation so that at the beginning of 2026 we can put all of this into force. We also started working on 2 different methodologies for forest management, for sustainable forest management, and also we will focus on livestock management in view of including also livestock management in this framework. I'll give you a few links here on your slide. There's also a newsletter. You can subscribe to be always up to date in terms of all of the events that we will organize. And of course, I'm ready for possible questions on your part. Thank you, Valeria, for the effort in terms of talking in Italian. And we're going to have questions after the first 3 speeches from Brussels, focusing on these topics, leaving more general issues for further discussion later on. So now I would like to give the floor to DG Agri, and I'll give the floor to Emmanuel Patel.
Yeah, thanks a lot for invitation. I'm from DG Agri, and I have some colleagues with me, especially Czech Terstra. But I will give you an overview where we are in CAP and how we try to guide farmer towards more suitable practices and towards regenerative agriculture, especially. And I will give you as well what is our intention in the CAP today, and to assess better the performance of the CAP, and for the future, how is our vision for the future for the CAP, because as you know, last week we delivered a paper on the vision. For the next slide, I will enter in the CAP objective. Next slide is remind, in fact, there is 9 in the current CAP for the ongoing programming period. We have different objectives, 9 objectives, and inside of these 9 objectives, we have 3 objectives dedicated to climate and dedicated to ornamental resources protection, and to preserve landscape fisheries, to preserve biodiversity. Now, based on that, we have some dedicated instrument in the CAP to be able to address this such objective. And if we see the next slide, in the next slide, we have the framework, dedicated framework for the CAP, as we call it green architecture. And in green architecture, there is a specific instrument in a way to be designed by member state and to address this objective. Okay. As you see now, if I look at green architecture, there is 2 main elements. One is the first layer is conditionality, is a compulsory layer, and inside of conditionality you have a specific standard to be defined at member state level. It's very basic practices to be respected by the farmer. And as you see, there is some standard, and we call this standard GAEC, G-E-C, Good Agricultural Environmental Condition. And this standard focus on especially on the soil management, and we underline the fact there is a need to have a crop rotation, minimum soil cover, or tillage management in some area where there is a risk of erosion. Is a basic principle to be implemented across Europe. But above this basic principle and basic practices, we offer the opportunity to go more in more ambitious, I would say, action, and is based on voluntary action. And there is a dedicated support for that in our CAP, and we have a dedicated instrument under Pillar 1, a specific fund. We call it Eco Scheme, and we have some dedicated instrument in Pillar 2 in rural development, where we could as well to support farmers who go beyond conditionality, and we're able to address some specific practices. And if you see the list of the practices, there is a cover crop, catch crop, no tillage, reduced tillage, some more elaborated crop rotation, some manure management techniques. We are able to support more holistic approach like agroforestry or some organic farming as well. It will depend on the member state design, but it's just to give you the fact there is some opportunity on the CAP to support more farmers when farmers decide to go further step and to elaborate more suitable practices. For the next slide, I will show you, in fact, how member state design their practices, in which way. Just to remind, in fact, in each member state, there is a CEP plan. Member state has to elaborate a plan, and inside of the plan, they have to design their intervention. But before designing intervention, they need to make a first analysis, a SWOT analysis, and to identify their need and to make some priority on their need. Depend on member state, and we want to address contextual issue, and we know in some Mediterranean area maybe there is more erosion, and maybe a priority to compare with the Nordic country. And member state based on this identification of need, and they have some strategy, and they design some intervention. And for each intervention, they allocate some budget. But we try to, we ask member state to classify the intervention based on a main topic. And for this purpose, we have some result indicators, and each intervention is classified based on result indicators. And result indicators is more the number of hectares on the intervention, a number of hectares to be implemented by the farmer, to compare with the total area total agricultural area in the member state. Just to show the different result indicators in the next slide, there is some dedicated result indicators as regards the natural resources. And for each natural resources, we have some dedicated result indicator. In the next slide, there is, in fact, a result indicators on soil management, and to improve soil quality. And yes, and this result indicator is a result indicator 19 in the graph is on the I think on the link is the result 19, and if you see there is 47% of area agricultural area concerned by this indicator. So I mean we member state has made a choice, in fact, to design a lot of intervention as regards the management of the soil and to improve the soil quality and to preserve the soil. Now, based on this first, I would say, overview, and we want to go in further step and to better identify, in fact, the practices, the farming practices as designed by the member state. And we have already organized a classification of intervention by farming practices, and it's the next slide. We have a labeling of intervention in a CAP strategic plan by farming practices. And based on that, we are able to go very far and to see which kind of practice is involved by intervention. And if we see the next slide, we try to have to make a mapping inside of the CAP. For the next slide, you will see, in fact, the breakdown per different type of practices. There is on the left practices supporting tillage and soil cover practice, or on the right more practice in line with crop rotation and diversification practices. And here you have different colors, and is more the number of the CAP plan repertoried in this type of practices. And in orange, we have the impact of the GAEC when the first layers, and above that, there is a more elaborate intervention via eco scheme or agro-environmental commitment in blue, just to see the complementarity with the first layer as regards the basic requirement, mandatory requirement, and above that, there is a more voluntary action, and you see the combination between both. And you see the different type of practices, but we can underline there is a focus on some soil cover, soil protection, and focus on tillage and crop rotation. We now, based on that, we want to go in direction of evaluation and to be able to assess the performance of these practices and the impact of these practices for the soil. And we have organized some study on that. We want to quantify, in fact, the impact of the practices on soil characteristic is in the next slide. Just a first step to be able to make better to make a link when we support some practice. What will be the real impact on this practice on the soil quality and the soil characteristic? And this ongoing exercise where we try, based on the labeling of different practices, to allocate some coefficient and to see what is the impact on soil characteristics such as soil erosion, soil organic matter, or soil the water capacity retention in the soil. Just to give you our in fact intention and to be able to assess the performance of the CAP. For the future, we will continue in this direction, but next slide is just to give you the timetable and where we are. As you see, in 2023, from 2023, we have designed each CAP plan, and we have approved a different CAP plan in member state, and now the CAP is implemented at member state level. But we are reflecting for the future because in 26 we are supposed to propose a new CAP or change some element in our CAP. But before that, we committed to have a dialogue with different stakeholders and with member states. We have a strategic dialogue, and we deliver a strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture last year. And based on that, we have issued recently, last week, a vision for agriculture and food. And our intention, yes, is to be to give a more roadmap for the next coming years and for the future generation 2040. And our intention is to have more bottom-up approach, and maybe it's more in line what you are doing today with this Living Lab, to take in board initiative as well from some public bodies, but as well from private actors. And our objective, we have selected 3 main objectives, just to have more attractive and predictable agri-food sectors, to foster a competitive and resilient sectors, and to provide the condition for future-proof sectors that mean to be in line with the main challenge. And when we talk about the main challenge is, for example, climate change or environmental issue. And in this slide, I put some key message how to address this key objective and which kind of action we can foresee. It's just there is more comprehensive description of vision in our website, but here I underline the main point where we can see convergence with your work. When we say how, for us, is just to continue to properly reward ecosystem services, to help farmers to get a better return from the market and by some initiative like carbon farming, to in fact to try to simplify the policy and in a way to help the farmer to assess themselves and their farm level performance. And okay, for example, we have still an issue as regards the EU climate objective, to support EU climate objective. And as regards action, yes, we will continue with CEP, but in the CEP, we try to continue to have a fair, more fairness as regards the income support and to have more targeted action and to take in account the context, some contextual, say, situation, to have some instrument as you try to develop nature or carbon credit. And for us, it's important as well to provide some compass for farmer, to guide the farmer, and to establish a voluntary benchmark on the farm's suitability, and to continue as well to address the water issue. And there is a water resilience strategy to be defined at EU level, and in a CAP we need to address this issue. And we are aware of the fact we need as well to try to continue to reduce the impact of some pesticide and to accelerate some access to biopesticides. It's just to give you, in fact, what we are thinking in the future, and the discussion has only started now, and we need to continue to discuss with member states, but as well with stakeholders. I will stop there my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I immediately give the floor to the third panelist from Brussels, providing us with another perspectives. And I leave the floor to Leonard Meyer. Please. Otherwise, we can ask a technician to share that for you. We were able, but we have the preview. But if you want, we can share it from Piacenza. A short comment, meanwhile, on the two presentations we have just heard. Very complex, very innovative, but complicated. So it's a moment of reflection. What we are saying, what we can see is that the European Commission, there is an ongoing situation, a quick evolution, but at the moment we do not have all involvements, and especially in the round table, we will try to reply. So during the second part of the morning, we will try to share the doubts, but also opportunities of having the real perception of what is going on in Brussels. So I leave the floor to Leonard. Now we can perfectly see in the presentation. Yes, we see the screen. If you just press on the F5, we can see it full screen. F5, just full screen.
The mission soil, which has as its main goal, as you can see here on the slide, to lead the transition towards healthy soils through, in particular, 100 living labs and lighthouses. So this is the overarching goal. And this is broken down into 8 more specific objectives. And generally, the living labs are free to work on, or the living lab projects, I should say, they are free to work on any of those soil health, on any of those aspects of soil health. But in the work program, in the mission work program 2023, we did have one so-called top-down topic specifically dedicated to Objective 2, and carbon farming even more specifically. And this is the context in which your project has been selected, of course. You can see on the right side of the slide how the, let's say, more operational objectives are organized for the mission soil. So there is, of course, also, let's say, a more traditional research and innovation program that's part of it. But then the second building block is indeed the living labs. So this is where the project fits in the bigger picture. If we go then to the next slide, please. Zooming in a bit on the role of the living labs in the mission. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So as this instrument of living labs is relatively new in the context of EU programmed research and innovation, from the side of the Commission, we did not immediately call for applications for living lab projects as such, but we rather had some preparatory actions first that were meant to prepare the ground by giving support to potential applicants in terms of how these projects should be organized, how to bring in some of the unusual actors that are such an important part of the concept. And then also, once the projects are up and running, to help them connect among each other. Now, Lilas for Soils is one of the first 5 living lab projects under the mission. And as you will have realized, each project includes more than 1 living lab, and on average they are 5. And that takes us already to round about 200 specific sites from this initial round of calls for application. And it's foreseen to progress like this through the coming annual work programs, so that by 2030 we should have quite easily actually reached the goal of 100 living labs and lighthouses, which is a somewhat different concept, but also part of the program, in the sense that from among the living lab sites that do particularly well, so-called lighthouses will then be selected at the next stage. Moving on then to the next slide, we can take a more specific, a closer look at some of the specific projects that are relevant in and around the soil carbon objective. So on the left-hand side here, you see the preparation and support projects, some of which have ended now or will soon end, but soil startup in particular is in full swing and will also be continued. Then in the middle here, there are the 5 living lab projects that I already mentioned, of which Lilas for Soil is one. But I also wanted to at least briefly mention some other projects, and Valeria already touched on one of them, namely Credible, which are not living lab projects, but deal with soil carbon or carbon farming from, let's say, a more traditional research angle. Credible is the project that is organizing the Carbon Farming Summit in Dublin next month. And also of particular interest probably are the 2 above, Marvik and MRV for SOC, which are both dedicated to monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon removals. Then on the next slide, there is an overview of where these 5 living lab projects, first of all, what they are called, and then where they operate across Europe. You can see that the picture is a bit patchy still. We need to do more to cover all the member states, but that's work in progress. Here, some of the color coding has gone wrong. Apologies for that. The brownish dots there, those are actually the Lilas for Soil sites, as you will recognize. And then you have the 4 other living lab projects, some of which also operate in Italy, and this we can see on the next slide. So 2 living lab projects in particular could be of interest from the perspective of share, in the sense that while they have other main objectives. In the case of ecoshells, that's pollution and biodiversity. And in the case of living soil, that's permanent crops. But nonetheless, we could see some potential for cooperation there, where the objectives overlap in terms of addressing soil carbon. So we don't have a recipe really for how this cooperation could best be organized, but I assume that in the community there will be some existing connections already, and through the support projects that I mentioned earlier, we can also try and be of help in making the necessary connections, or the potentially useful connections, I should say. And then finally, just highlighting some of the individual living labs in those projects. We have done a bit of calculation in terms of which of the projects touch upon soil carbon in one way or another, and we came up with a figure of 19%, which is quite good. So even without this top-down call, under which Lilas for Soils was selected, the objective is being tackled in other projects. And the most relevant living labs, as we see it, are some which work in France and in Spain. So those are the ones that, beyond the ones in Italy that might be interesting from a national or regional perspective, these are the ones that could be most interesting from a substantive perspective. Okay, and then, yeah, I also just leave you with a few on the final slide that is not in your version, but that will be in the final version. I have included some links to sources of additional information that could be useful in the follow-up. Thank you very much.
Grazie Leonard, grazie anche a Valeria e Manuel. Vista l'ora tarda, io direi di passare direttamente agli altri interventi, però pregherei tutto il pubblico presente e in remoto, se hanno domande da fare su questi aspetti specifici, di farle pervenire all'Università e noi le sottoporremo e metteremo poi le risposte sul sito del Living for Soils. Proprio per mi scuso insomma per questa
on the website, so apologies, we cannot have a debate now. I see that Maria Santapier from CREA is already on stage, and she will focus on Italy. So we started with Europe and what Europe is telling us. Still, it's all in progress or partly in progress, but let's see what is the situation at national level. Can we share the slides? So here are my slides, and they will be focusing on the work done not just by CREA but also by ERSAF. We are collaborating together in carrying out different projects on all of those programs. Carbosec, for example, we collaborated also in that. Okay, so how to make the certification system more economic, and by also simplifying it, because there are 150 different carbon certification schemes in Europe. So does the CRCF regulation simplify or add bureaucracy? How does it coordinate with other regulations? And can new technologies contribute to this objective? How can public and private databases be networked and made available to citizens without making sensitive data public? Which agricultural practices fall under carbon farming? How effective are they? And what impact they have on climate change, and what are the benefits? And then also some hints on the best practices, possible best practices. Now let's look at the context. As you see, it's a very complicated context, and regulations that were put in place at European and national level are interconnected, and soil as part of them. So we have to start reasoning around with a more holistic approach, as you know. The regulation, and so the CRCF is now in place. It's been approved on the 27th of November 2024. And there's a copy of it in your folder. We have actually different categories, as Mrs. Forlin told us. We are now focusing on carbon farming in particular. From the first draft, actually changes were made, substantial changes were made. At the beginning, we had some criteria for in terms of the permanence of carbon, but this has been recognized as something only transitional and not permanent. Now, this is a slide that I took from the two colleagues that you see up above, because these two practices are not new. They are already included in the CIP and ecosystems of CIP. So what is carbon farming? That's farming practices and strategies for sustainable use of the soil. And they allow us to remove CO2, and also other greenhouse effect gases. So the regulation has a name, that of providing some order, as Mrs. Forlin said, in terms of all of the certification schemes. Now here you see an example of the possible carbon farming practices: conversion from fallow to permanent grassland, maintenance of permanent grassland, agroforestry, catch crops and cover crops, minimum or zero tillage conservation, agricultural conservation, conversion to fallow, reclamation of wetlands and peatlands. Now, I would like to focus on this important success case, an inventory that is available online, where you can have access to different certification schemes that are there at world level. There's also a tool that allows you to search further in terms of the characteristics of these certification schemes. Just to give you an idea about these certification systems, these are the best known ones at world level, and you can classify them by different criteria: the use of models, default values, using or not remote sensing, and also soil sampling is envisaged. In my viewpoint, actually, it should always be there, soil sampling, but some schemes are actually not including it. This slide was presented also by Valeria. In this case, I would like to underline in particular regarding soil, we have soil emission reduction and carbon farming sequestration. Why? Because we're talking about reducing the emissions, but also we're talking about removal. So from the best practices viewpoint, of course, this has to do with an efficient use of fertilizers. Therefore, it has to do with what about fertilizer usage. But I will actually focus on carbon farming sequestration, so this, the central part. Also, we need to understand well the formula behind, because removal is actually positive aspect to reducing carbon. So, but removal has a negative value because you're subtracting it from the atmosphere. That is why we have a -2 tons, for example, per hectare. And then the baseline is also of importance because the carbon farming practices must have a positive value in the formula, because the removal has to be higher than the standard baseline level. This is another interesting outcome that comes out of the carbon project. By measuring the delta SOC, and this was developed by soil scientists. So in this case, it's a positive value, but of course, this is not enough because the baseline is not stable. So in time, the baseline in terms of organic carbon varies due to climate change. So in case A, there's no impact on climate change, and the measurement will, the two measurements at the beginning and at the end of the activity will be the same. But actually, it's not like this. In my next slide, I will show you that actually the most realistic scenarios are the C and D scenarios. So with the impact of climate change. So what we could see on our fields will be a slight increase or a mitigation of the loss, because we cannot even think about assessing at an increase, but we can mitigate the loss that you would have had without putting the practice in place. I would like you to focus on this slide because here you see the C and D sort of scenarios. So having said this, there's a discussion on the use of the standard baselines. So on the fact that we need these reference levels, because you can make mistakes if you just measure at the very beginning and then at the very end, because there are changes that take place in between. So it is important to take that into account. And there's also a disadvantage, how to determine the baseline so that it is highly representative, as the regulation envisages. There are models that have been set up, the so-called digital soil mapping systems or models, templates. But without going too much into detail, one of the factors involved is man, so the soil manager. But there's a mistake there, and we need to highlight that in the regulation. So they will have to refer to the method, they will have to refer to the baseline. And this error must be explicit. Why? Well, here you see the possible sources for such errors. The sampling, different sampling protocols in field, different analytical standards and procedures. So conversion methods might have to be envisaged in the regulations. Also here, an example of a study underway. And we're trying and using LUCAS, which is the European monitoring, with national figures. And it's a bit hard to create maps, as you see. This just to tell you that we are trying and building baselines at European level by using LUCAS data. And in particular, the proposal is that of using ensemble modeling at European level so that we can improve all of the issues that I was talking about before. But the question is, what if this are in the maps that is actually higher than the temporary carbon removal that you can obtain from carbon farming practices? So further details in terms of how to quantify uncertainties is important and will be provided. In the remove stop, what we do is the following. So you see on the slides, we also carry out a socio-economical analysis to understand also the money that we have to put into all of that and how all of this can be used in the national reporting. There are different sites with tests already underway. Here you see that we're testing different aspects, not just organic carbon, but we want to understand how carbon farming practices also improve the soil in general. So we're assessing different things. In the UNICATT project, we are trying and assessing the baselines in different pedoclimatic areas. So we have used the Italian map for it, for the different environments, and trying and identifying those that were similar. And then here, all of the different descriptions regarding the practices present in all of these environments. As for the use of the remote sensing and proximal sensing, well, the objective is to trying and reducing the number of tests on the field so as to reduce costs. But we need to take possible errors into account. So there are pros and cons also in this respect. My last slides are just to hint the outcomes of some practices that have been adopted at European level. Conservative farming, for example, in a global meta-analysis, seems to see an increase in organic carbon. So you start with the initial carbon content, climate, altitude, and so on and so forth. So different parameters are taken into account. Also, organic farming has a positive impact, as you might expect. So it can be included in carbon farming practices, but climate has an effect, and also the content has an impact. And all studies and models agree. So to conclude, standardization is necessary on a territory basis because it allows you to have a reference standard. You can use proximal remote sensors, but you need to have local validation. So you have to have data taken on the field. It would be also important to share data so that we can have an improvement in these maps, so that we can improve further these maps. Of course, this is not easy because of the sensitivity of the data, but we can try out. And then also the fact that we can increase SOC through conservative farming and biological farming. And that is all what I had to tell you. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. And now the floor goes to Andrea Fiorini. And we're going to see in terms of how to put all of this in place. And also we will focus on the living labs. So Andrea, the floor is yours. You will tell us the opportunities that we have available in terms of living lab.
Yeah, thank you, Vincenzo. First remark on my side, we heard some presentations quite different from each other. At the very beginning, we heard the presentation about the evolution on CAP, because CAP is going to be integrated with carbon farming and then living labs, which are defined as the key elements to solve some issues such as carbon farming. And then Maria, an overview of technical and scientific experiences, just focusing on what is still missing. This is the current scenario which we created for you, so that you can understand how specific players, technical, scientific, local players, all stakeholders at the heart of these living labs, which their orientations are. Share is the living lab for carbon farming, is the living lab for carbon capture. But what is this living lab approach that we have just heard? Well, it's an innovative and dynamic ecosystem which is combining scientific research and practical approaches. So we want them to be practical by going straight to the heart, being aware of our potential, and then operating in a differentiating environment and in live conditions, waiting for specific, predictable results. We need to think and to manage the issues, the variability of nature. These are not test fields, these are real conditions. And then they use continuous feedback to enhance innovation. We are not perfect. We try to implement the most appropriated practices. We will get it wrong, no doubt. We will make mistakes, no doubt, but we will fix our approach. We will correct our approach. The approach of the European Commission is the European Network of Living Labs. And so the living lab approach has the need the need to integrate stakeholders, and by stakeholders we need farmers, researchers, politicians, industry, and citizens in a combined approach, maximizing technologies and practices in a participatory and iterative process of co-creation. The goal is to co-design together solutions which somehow allow to achieve the goals. And what does co-creation, co-designing mean? It means that the component of these living labs are sitting at different tables, expressing their opinions, being aware of the regulatory framework. This is why these panelists have been that took the floor before me were very valuable to understand the starting point. The model, just to provide new, is the goal is to develop a site-specific approach, and in a real context. This is a key element. What is our key element? We need to perform test on real field. We need to perform field trials so that practices that we are designing and implementing together can be actually managed. There is not one size fits all solution. There is not one agro technique, top down, copied and paste. For regenerative agriculture is just cover crop rotation with soybean, corn, and wheat. No, at all. Conservative agriculture is a set of practices range of options that we have available with some arrows. One is lighter, one is heavier, and based on external conditions, we have to set the goals and hit the goals. The goal can be carbon farming, regenerative agriculture, but the goal is to restore soil fertility for economic sustainability, because without that, there is no farms, but also effectiveness, because this means to reduce losses and environmental sustainability. Methodology and implementation very shortly. Well, the idea is to build up a core team and map all the stakeholders as a kickoff of this activity, and creating clear protocols to engage and involve everybody. And then adaptive management. This is key word. We want to implement iterative feedback loops to continuously optimize practices on real results, and adopt proven guidelines by successful initiatives, transferring know-how for successes, but also failure, because based on other people's mistakes, if they are properly shared, everybody can learn, and this is an important advantage for everybody. But living labs is not just practice implementation, it's also monitoring. We moved from forms of practice-based forms of funding to measure-based funding. So based on measure. So we have to collect data, and the next panelist will focus on that. So collect data, this is essential. Collect data in an economically sustainable way is also very important. We cannot afford to spend more than what we used to spend in the past to certify something that is still there to be defined. And then we monitor carbon, but carbon monitoring means organic matter monitoring, which is the main parameter to measure soil fertility. But we also monitor some other features such as humidity, pH, and nutrients. What is the increase of organic matter increase in terms of water retention, for instance? These are crucial elements we have to deal with. Here, very shortly, we have to understand the kickoff of share. Where does kickoff come from? The milestone of share is Life Help Soil project that was organized in the 5 years from 2013 to 2017, 20 pilot farms involving farmers, thanks to the contribution of 7 universities and research centers, with the involvement of 2 companies which were building equipment, but we immediately understood that they were very important. And then some other involved operating groups. And so working with farmers, we understood that their needs, their issues, which were supposed to be dealt with thanks to these practices matched with technology. And then a need, with the need of building up an embryo, an incubator, which is the starting point of all our initiatives. Living Lab Suolo, which you see on the screen, but Living Lab is not just a sharing of ideas. Living Lab need to focus on historic data. This is why Living Lab is providing users with a background, with practices, and also sampling quite stiff to have a background and the foundation of data, which is essential. And Maria was just mentioning that, but models which are supposed to be adjusted and set up garbage in, garbage out. If I have garbage coming in, I need to have garbage going out. And then Lilas for soil, already presented by Sonia and by DG Agri as well. Just one detail in particular. Here you can see at the bottom of the screen the commitment of this project. 1,100 month per man. So every day we have 20 people full-time working on this initiative. So that's a guarantee in terms of continuity. 5 years they are committed with different backgrounds. There are the scientific community, there are companies, Danone, civil society as well. And the goal is to strengthen carbon farming in the Med, promoting a more sustainable agriculture with low input and zero emission. So 5 living labs based on these practices: the management of peatlands, agroforestry, SOC, enhancing livestock management and nutrient management. We are focusing only on 2 of these practices. So Share Living Lab, which at the very beginning the name was Living Lab 3, but we call it Share because Share is sharing, but it's also the acronym of tools: soil health, regenerative agriculture. So this is not coded, but in regenerative agriculture, we can also include other principles. What are the key elements of a living lab, of our living lab? Long-term experiments with the 20-year experiments and lighthouse farms. So demonstration farms where new technologies can be tested and promoted to have table to discuss, focusing on what is good, but also what is not going well, because failure is very important to stress, to understand what is supposed to be adjusted. These are the partners, Università Cattolica, ERSAF, and Confagricoltura. These are some of the main participants. I'm not mentioning them. We work especially on soil management. And this is what we want, the practice that we want to change. So arable lands, the types of farms we work on, cereal and industrial crops, and also livestock farms. And then moving to the art, share is one lighthouse for so far, but we have some more, but we have to code their role. The lighthouse is Cerzo. We have many long-term tests, long-term experiments, then 10 demo sites where practices are tested, where we measure the effects of this test. This is the detail. I'm not entering into all details. We do not have the names of the farm, but that's the starting point. We began in the year 2000, and the last farms was involved in 2024 last year, but we are very happy of involving them all. What's next? The next step. We are here, the kickoff event. Next week, we will be in Dublin, the European Carbon Farming Summit in Dublin. A very important event on the procedure after the November regulation, and we will share as one of the first case studies on carbon farming. And then there will be a bid that will be launched the 10th of March. So a call for applications to add 10 sites. So the goal is to get to 20 sites, 10 plus 10. Then the call for application will close down mid-May. We will select, and then as Leo Meyer, we will use some practices, and we will set up the protocols in our long-term experiments. And then starting from September, we kick off. Actually, it's a matter of continuing, because we began in 2020, even before that, but we can call these activities as Linux for Soils activities and some other monitoring activities. So share is practice implementation. To wrap up, we are going to manage nutrients, so crop diversification, cover crops, reduced tillage, non-tillage, efficient use of fertilizers, including manure, and forage crop. So these are some of the examples. I'm going to repeat them: crop diversification, cover crops, reduced tillage, and strip till. So this is not one equipment. This is not minimum tillage or no tillage at all. It means these are tools. It means you have an idea, the idea of pursuing conservation and to increase soil fertilities with the available tools, the tools in the hands of our farmers, the tools that I am given by the stakeholders. So reduced tillage, non-tillage, efficient use of fertilizers, including manure and forage crops. We have some practical implementation, but we also monitor carbon in the soil. I'm not going to focus to go too much in details, so we map the plot, so we have to locate and with sample points, optimized points, so that I can understand to collect the highest number of data. We do sampling and then we do assessment, and then is that enough? Not at all. As I said, we need models because models allow us to extend the results and outcomes over time and involve other conditions if they are properly set up. Why is that necessary? To get to the heart, because we have to understand the actual outcome of our practices. At the top left, after a certain period of time, we got to a certain level of organic matter. But what is it? What is our outcome at the very beginning? Well, this means that, yeah, you think that the level of carbon of organic matter is something static, so our business as usual. So what I should have applied would neither increase nor decrease the soil fertility. But this is not always the case, because I usually implement practices to increase organic matter. And so in this case, I would overestimate the real impact of adopted practices, because overestimate the impact of your action may generate problems. But then you also have another perspective. If I implement practices and I have no advantage or a minor reduction, but if with no practices at all, business as usual would be much worse than that. So this, you need to achieve the best scenario. I increase carbon, I increase soil fertility. If I had not do that, the situation would be very bad, very poor. So you have to recognize what I have said, even if the situation is not really improving. It's anyway better than the no action. We already have 80 stakeholders. Before this kickoff event, we have a website. You have the link both in Italian and in English, and within the website, we will try to share, of course, simplifying them and focusing on the impact, what we do, scientifically speaking, providing the possibility of being understood by all players, all stakeholders of the Living Lab for their best. I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much. I hope that the situation is clearer what a living lab is supposed to do, a set of living labs in Italy and in Europe. But we And we are going to have another important panelist, Marco Acutis. How can we calculate that? That's a role I leave to you, Marco.
Well, actually, I'm enthusiastic about carbon farming, about farming in general. And we see us as though the world sees us as we've been using fertilizers as we wanted to pollute our groundwaters. But agriculture is something that wants to damage its own business. And now, having this possibility to say we're fighting against climate change and we're taking up CO2 from the atmosphere. So that's great. Okay, and I got my slides. So sometimes it's not pessimism, but it's objective realism. Very quickly, many speakers spoke before me, so I'll try and be as short as possible. The carbon cycle, you see, the oceans are so important, but we cannot do much, actually. We cannot do anything. And then the soils, that's another area. And on soils, we can certainly act upon, because we lost 30 to 50% of carbon from agricultural soils. And then vegetation, so the wood of trees is important, is key, but it's just 1/3 of the value of the carbon stored in the soils. So of course, reforestation projects are welcome. Planting more trees is a good practice, but actually the key role of trees is their effect on the soil. As for the carbon market, you see the slide shows how it works. And we also have figures on the different emissions. And of course, I mean, we all have to eat. So if we have some emissions, it's something that we need to accept, but we can go down with that figure, because we have, some caps that we have to put, and actually Europe placed some caps, and this is important. Maybe we are the only one that put caps on CO2 emissions, but let's start doing it. So my opinion is that it is important, even though it's just us doing it, it's just the Europeans. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. I'm actually very proud of performing in this way. And we know that clean energy is a big business that we can develop. So if you go over the cap, you have to do the offsetting. So I might not be an expert in forests, and so I ask an expert in that to help me out. This, there's a damage that has to be put up. And once you carry out the project, when you certify the project to being forestation, methane capture, then carbon credits come back. But am I able to finance and organize all of this? Well, because also I'll have to be able to quantify emissions. I'll have to be able to understand how much I have to compensate. If I'm on the industrial side, that's okay. But on the side of compensation mechanisms, well, I'm weaker in this respect. And hence, I have to carry out a project that, any project that would meet, however, the criteria so that it can be examined. Why forests are easy? Because we see them growing through satellites. Whereas for other projects is a bit more difficult. And then, of course, we need to be able to quantify because it must be in line with carbon credits that were issued. And then, 1 ton of CO2 is 1 carbon credit. This is 3.6 tons of CO2, 3.6 credits. But are they worth something? Well, here I'm talking about like the cement manufacturers that use up a lot of energy. It's not that I'm against them, but let's see the worth of all of this. But the other day when my presentation, we're talking about 80 euros per ton of CO2. 0.3, therefore, it's 0.3 tons in the soil. So, 80 euros is a sum coming from 1 hectare, but that is the so-called compulsory market. Now here on the right-hand side, you see what happens if I want to buy carbon on the stock exchange, which is nature-based. And here there are objective, certified, verified carbon credits according to very strict protocols, and you can sell them. And if you have to sell them on the market, I wouldn't do so, however, because if I have to imagine it, I would imagine a high-scale project. Microsoft actually did that in its history. It bought such carbon credits, and of course, if they were all certification based, high quality certification based. We're talking about 20-25 euros per carbon credit in private negotiations. These are just rumors. But if I want to buy on a public exchange, why am I not buying it at 0.35 euros? Because it's not there. The certification procedure is too complicated, but I would buy them at over 35 euros. So sometimes they go up. Before the war, they went up to 20 euros. They were there. This is just a situation I wanted to draw your attention to. In terms of Europe, the voluntary market is very small, but it is growing. And it is also a matter of offering a good image of your company, and also this thanks to European regulations on the matter. And soil, of course, is key, and all of the agro-system production and services are linked to the soil. And so it's a reservoir of physical and biological chemical resources. We just know only 1% of the species that inhabit it. So it's hard to also investigate it. It's very difficult. I remember, like, when I take blood samples, times you need just a drop, whereas the soil is different from 10 meter to 10 meter. And then the ecosystem services, the value of biodiversity, I will not dwell upon that. And also the increasing soil organic matter, which is a win-win for all-round sustainability. And then the effect on chemical, physical, biological characteristics. So I have simplified all of that, but it improves the chemical and physical characteristics besides the biological characteristics. And of course, I'm not going to give you all of the details, but let's now dive into the topic of carbon farming. We have to do monitoring. We have to monitor, and we have 3 keywords: MRV: monitoring, reporting, and verification. In the US, they have MRV, i.e., the first M stands for measuring, whereas we only have monitoring, reporting, and verification, i.e., check. And it, you know, do whatever you want, and we will assess the outcomes. Of course, previous speakers told us where we measured the outcomes, but is that easy? Is that always positive? In theory, result-based schemes have some pros. They're flexible for the farmer. Farmers can adapt, as Andrea said. And there's a clear link also, because here it's there's always this link between what you do and what you obtain. And potentially, they are also more effective. And also enhancement of fields or areas with suboptimal productivity. And there is also an educational role for farmers and for the society at large. So we're talking about the whole Europe, not just Italian farmers, so rural areas. But there are also disadvantages, financial risks. For example, you do something, you don't know whether you will get a benefit out of that. Of course, it's a matter of market logics, but you have to take that into account. And of course, what is important is that the monitoring, reporting, and verification, and then additionality. How long does it take to get the outcomes? We need to be clear. We cannot cheat. It takes 5 years. Otherwise, you're not seeing anything. And we're going to develop on this later on, and we will see how important this is to understand. What do I do now to get an outcome in 5 years? Well, you have to take a model. You envision what will happen in 5 years. And then in 5 years, you measure, and it's well. And this is what Vera does in terms of certification. So providing certification, exposing to that. But living labs are extraordinary in this respect, but you have to have a capillary technical consultancy, and it's not easy to find the right consultants with the right experience. And that's the great idea of the living labs. They will be so helpful in this respect. And then how can we increase the organic matter? Well, I think everyone knows this, so I'll move forward and I'll skip this slide and all of these slides regarding carbon farming. Just one word on organic farming. So conservation farming, precision farming, the fact that the precision farming can certainly be important in bringing about an improvement in this respect. Organic farming, well, I would like to remind you that just can be used in this respect. Organic farming is very different from what it used to be in the past. So things have changed. And also modern organic farming is interesting. And then monitoring the results is also another key aspect. I don't know if I still have time. Okay, so still a few more minutes to focus on the monitoring of our results. We need to check the seed stocks, how many tons per hectare. You can drill down, you take 100 grams of something, and you know, the good quality of the sample, but still it's a little part of it. And a piece of land is not always consistent. 1 cubic meter can have a weight in a peatland or 700 or 1,800 kilos if we are on a compacted piece of land, or you know, go even higher up. So it's a matter of content and the volume on which this content is being distributed. And some say that we should reference to the thickness, so 30 centimeters, but some actually argue that we should go deeper, down to 60 centimeters, but that is hard. And then look at the level of accuracy, level of precision for our calculations. Like, for example, we sampled the 1.5%, 15 grams per kilogram of organic carbon, then about density, 1.3 tons per cubic meter, and so on and so forth. Think about this case. We read 15 and 14.25 in another case. That the difference is minimal. We do the calculation again, and you see again what happens, 10 carbon credits, and so on and so forth. So we need to be very careful with these measurements. In this slide, and I think you can all read this, because we said we will improve the soil, but also how compact the soil is important to take into account, because it becomes higher sometimes, and the equivalent mass is therefore so important. And actually, I haven't seen it mentioned in the different protocols. So this has to be taken into account. So monitoring the apparent density is key. I know it is burdensome, but and it's a pain in the neck, but I know this, but it is very, very important. And then statistics. This 4 per 1,000 annually. If we improve but 4 per 1,000, so this can be a sensitive objective, but look at in this table how long it takes, how many years it takes, and how many samples. If you want to see something after 10 is you need the samples. Maria explained the importance of all of these maps, and also Andrea explained to us how to do proper sampling. And these are the figures, quite frightening. So I don't know, I cannot tell you, it's not my fault. I'm not a genius. And as a consequence, I cannot tell you how you can go to each farmer. You are good on this piece of land, whereas you work not so well on the other plot. But actually, it's the single farmer we have to give money to, and he might reply, "Oh, but I did as my neighbor did, and he had no problems." But you know, it's a matter of understanding properly and also checking what the figures from the ministry are. Let's improve also on remote sensing. So let's monitor the outcomes through remote monitoring. And we have to also improve on calibration, look at the variability of the models, and look at another sampling issue. This is my last slide. This is just an example of measurements made. We got here, then carbon was lost, and then the same scheme continues on and it goes up. And if we look at the whole trend, how can we attribute the credit? I don't have a perfect answer, but if you did things, you have to take that into account. And to that was underestimated, but it's not enough because variability is huge and it's hard to measure and model. There are also nitrification inhibitors. This is a study that was carried out in the US, but I'll skip it. So my conclusions, we know what to do: cover crops, reduce tillage, and so on, enhancement of organic manure, digest. We need to check the models and verify at least every 5 years. Thank you very much, Marco, for having sort of done this rush. But I know that we all have many questions, but please let's now have a coffee break. No more than 15-minute break. We will resume all of the questions at the very end of the round table.
Here we are. Welcome back to the round table. I try you to be a bit shorter in your questions and also in the answers. So the goal is to pick up as many questions as possible. Thank you. Thank you for being back here. Here we are for the second session of our conference this morning, and I want to welcome you to the round table of our conference, Share a Path to Carbon Farming. So, carbon farming, that's essential for zero emission practices and resilient systems. We know that agriculture and farming is supposed to play a key role for climate neutrality, but to turn this objective into reality, we need tangible solutions which are sustainable solutions that need to be assessed, to be interpreted, because we are talking about economic, environmental, and social transmission and perspective. So this is not just tech scientific innovation. It is not just a piece of equipment we used in a farm. It is not just soil management system to be implemented in any farm, regardless of the soil characteristics or environmental conditions, but this is a real change of paradigm. The active involvement of farmers, institutions, industry, research in a collaborative process where solutions are designed together, tested together, and an adaptive management in field. Today we have the opportunity of listen to and share with representatives of different categories, which may help to set up a shared vision on carbon farming. We have a clear goal to understand the instruments and tools so that these practices are not only environmental effective, not only climate effective, but also positive and constructive for stakeholders. This is why I have the pleasure to kick off this constructive and open dialogue to code some development pathways so that we can understand how these approaches may be turned into active solutions. So our first guest is Andrea Ferrarini, researcher in Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Andrea is working in some of the European initiatives we have just described in the first part of the morning, the Marvic projects and others. And they have an important role. Going back to what Marco said, the goal is to support European community in setting up solutions for new practices for carbon storage. So research is playing an essential role in carbon farming. So Andrea, what is the tangible contribution that the research may implement to provide operating tool for carbon farming projects, especially for carbon measurement? Yeah, thank you. This is essential for us. This is the point. Carbon farming has many challenges, and carbon quantification, carbon measurement is essential. If we do not measure, we cannot understand how effective they are. think about a company that want to fund because there are many different solutions. Anyway, regardless of the way universities, research centers forecast and field research are essential to deal with three main challenges for absorption and reduction of CO2. Scalability. This has already been proved on 100,000 hectares. Do we have models adjusted to provide simulations and data that we have? And so scalability is the first point, and then cost accuracy, because if adopting a carbon farming practice is 80 euros per hectare, and we receive the yield, the payback is 100 euros. So we have to assess cost and benefits. So we need operating goals that are scalable with a great cost accuracy ratio. We are assessing guidelines, and we need to calibrate and validate models and adapt them to specific conditions of the site. Baseline is essential. In Parma, the situation is completely different from what we have here in Piacenza. So ourselves as Cattolica University, we are developing baselines. What are we doing? We work on every single plot, but we are integrating satellite images. We have an important help from satellite images because we have incoming data with the yield estimates when the crop is prepared, when is tillage, the input data for our models, but then satellite images are essential to understand where we have to sample our fields, and to do so we are working on some intelligent and smart sampling. We have seen that not only for initializing, because of course we cannot simply take one carbon sample per field. So smart sampling is essential. And also we need to understand where to verify after 5 years, because the European Union and other standards are asking us to check the accuracy of our forecast of our models. And so digitalization is another key element. If we have 100,000 hectares, we have to think that for every single field, we need the input data, so manuring or tillage, so interconnection of models with any possible declaration, any possible quality and quantitative register is essential to reduce the uncertainty and to be more accurate in our cost assessment for farmers and also for investors. Thank you, Andrea. Well, we can easily understand that the interconnection between different stakeholders is extremely important, because digitalization and cost reduction is a key element to be pursued. We cannot afford to do things two ways or twice, because we do not talk to each other. Living the lab as an opportunity, and there will be other opportunities to cluster, to work together, to cooperate on these elements. Second panelist was supposed to be Silvia Motta, which is not me, but Silvia had to leave for she's not in good conditions, and Pietro Rivazza is with us, replacing Silvia Motta, an officer at ERSAF, participating together with Silvia to targeted initiatives to foster spreading and dissemination of knowledge and know-how, such as the AKIS project, Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, whose goal is to close the communication and knowledge gap between the different stakeholders of this sector. So the certification of carbon credits is one of the most important aspects for the success of carbon farming policies in Europe. In this regard, we are waiting. After the November regulation, we are waiting for the following steps to code specific strategies. So what is the current status of a carbon credit certification in Europe? So what steps are missing and what recent developments have been made to ensure their reliability in international recognition? Thank you, Andrea. Silvia Motta is not well. I took notes during the first part of the morning, also because I do not want to repeat what has already been said. Well, of course, considering your question, the starting point, of course, is the new November regulation, which is a voluntary-based system, even if it is a regulated system, which may induce a sustainable management of soil in order to promote carbon farming practices. So I do not want to repeat what has already been said. So one of these slides mentioning the equality criteria that are used in this regulation. We have seen that the first criterion is stating that the activities that are going to be done must bring about net and measurable aspects and positives. So this is essential. Benefits are not just considered in terms of CO2 reduction or greenhouse gases reduction, but they must also be measurable. This is a critical element which we expect to clear up over the next few months. And I will make a deep dive in a following moment. Then the second point is that these activities can sum up one on top of the others next to the duties already existing. Third element, it must be a long-term storage. So to reduce release in the atmosphere. Fourth element is to contribute and to achieve at least one or more sustainability goals. What is innovative in this new regulation is focusing on agriculture. So the activity of carbon farming must involve a sustainable management for at least 5 years. But what is new is that this approach can and must represent a new economic opportunities for farmers through carbon credits. So this would allow to have an extra spur, an extra motivation. So not just for an environmental advantage, but also represent a possibility of new source of revenue for farmers, next to what is already expected and stated within the CIP. So this is a change in paradigm for a more resilient agriculture. What are the challenges over the next few months? Trying to answer to your question. Well, the challenge is to ensure reliability to the system. So we want a system to be reliable through certification systems which are supposed to be standardized, transparent, economically sustainable, to quantify carbon credits. And another key element is the patterns, the certification schemes. So we want the system to be reliable and certification bodies must be independent, must be skilled enough so that they can check that activities comply with the criteria established by the rules. These are the critical elements that must provide credibility to the system. Thank you, Pietro. Thank you. And now the third panelist of the morning, we have Anna Trettener, a pioneer in conservative farming, direct seeding, crop rotation, and cover crops already being used in her farms, and she's the president of Confagricoltura in Vicenza. Anna, one of the most delicate elements is to involve farmers in carbon farming practices to understand how this can be done effectively. So what can be an effective way to raise awareness, to involve the agricultural sector on carbon farming issues? And how can living labs be the keystone to ensure that the proposed solutions are really applicable and beneficial for agricultural businesses?
Well, I'll try and be as short as possible, and I'll be starting with my personal experience, also as president of Confagricoltura in for the province of Vicenza, and I had that role also in Venice and in other areas. So I have 20 years experience on my shoulders. In terms of the carbon farming type I'm working with, is that according to the no-till associated with the cover crops and other rotational crops accordingly and according to what the market is requiring. But farmers sometimes say, oh, it doesn't work, my field is too small, so on and so forth. But if we are here today, it's because someone many years ago started having a vision. It's not the early adopters, but people that had a vision and that really worked hard, because we had no sewing machines in those days. So we had to go and get it in South America. And anytime we needed a spare part, we would run crazy. But as you said, we always have the pioneers, and those that instead start with an advantage, whereas those that started earlier on have a value for the whole society. I see young people that are approaching all of this, maybe starting from the agronomic values. So taking care of the soil is important. And actually, many young people are more and more aware of this. Sharing experiences also is very important. We've invited to Italy so many people in these years, starting from Dunbaker, Carlos Corretto Lamarca, one from Zealand, the other one from the US. And here in this room, there are people that came with me and with whom I have had experiences abroad. So I think that now we need this experience on the soil. Living Lab could be a good tool, and I feel it is a good tool. There must be also opportunities to start a cross-sectional dialogue between the academy, the seed industry and doing this on the field, see why that sewing machine did not work well, trying and finding solutions on the field so that things go better. I saw this in Argentina, it works. The CRE groups do this, and also INTAC and other bodies. So these technology bodies that help, like I saw this in Argentina in the 70s, they said this that sewing, not even Superman can do it. But when we started, they all thought we were crazy. They would come at night to check our fields and see what we had done on them. So these living labs are so important, but we need also quickly to create a network for information sharing, because we need to also keep control of fake news. And we need to involve all of the stakeholders, including farmers and including sewing machine manufacturers. Thank you very much, Anna. I do agree with you when you say that we cannot just tackle all of this in university classes. So I think that the so-called lighthouse companies are so important, and we need to set up meetings, organized and structured meetings, so that we can touch upon the final outcomes, the successes and failures as well, to improve further. And now speaker Paolo Manfredi, entrepreneur with a background in biology and a long career in interacting with the environment and the farming industries. Paolo, owner of the MCM system that provides advanced systems for soil management. So you are here as an entrepreneur. So my first question to you is a general one, and it regards the role of the Entrepreneurs Association and its view. So how aware is the industrial world on all of the issues regarding carbon farming and carbon removal in particular? And what is the position of the Entrepreneurs Association in Italy, i.e. Confindustria, versus all of these projects, living labs included, that have been mentioned this morning? Well, the Entrepreneurs Association sometimes is a bit far from these regulations, and it's only the big companies that are involved, like in the carbon shares, like steel making companies. And so all of this is seen as a constraint and a hurdle versus growth. And this, of course, we can expect, because if we in the past had a Western world that was sort of compact, but now we're moving towards a more fragmented vision, and the competition of other countries is cumbersome. And this leads to paradoxes. So we, the virtuous one, try and regulate with the carbon issue, with also a burden. And then there is this problem of maritime transportation competition. There are North African enterprises that are now giving problems to those that are in this industry. The First Minister of Qatar said that they would not provide any more liquid gas to Europe. So we are not in a favorable situation, but focusing on carbon removal, on the carbon removal issue, I see your conference as something very positive, because we've heard about possible solutions and initiatives for carbon removal, starting with agriculture or storing carbon in the soil, or improvements that can be put in place. But of course, there are no doubts about soil degradation. What we could have doubts on is the effect of man on climate change, but we can do something on soil degradation, so the loss of organic matter due to intensive farming and due to too many fertilizers being used. So for sure, the Entrepreneurs Association view is the more agriculture produces, the more, of course, raw material we receive and products we receive, but we need to identify a carbon storage solution at the same time. Yes, so in your view, it's clear that we need to make a few calculations. I understanding where is the disadvantage on the basis of request. So who's giving me equal opportunities on the market, even though I'm obliged to carry out certain measures. So quantifying these impacts in terms of loss of competitiveness is key. But it is also crucial to correctly understand what are all of the financing options available in terms of carbon farming. We hear a lot of technicalities, a lot of technical terminologies in setting, offsetting, scope 1, 2 emissions, together with different standards and supporting mechanisms. But to understand properly how all of this is applied to our context, and not just there up in the air, Andrea, could you please give us a more in-depth analysis on all of this? You know, payments made on the basis of practices applied, and how can farmers get access to financial aids, private and public ones, to adopt carbon farming practices, but all of this being practice-based? Yes, indeed, all of these new terms are heard more and more, and we are seeing all of these terms also in the legislation. We have the negotiate contract, and then of course you show farmers simulation and quantification, which is another key issue, because yes, we have certification schemes and terminologies, but then we need to produce figures and numbers. So with the technology of the co-benefits, which is also another important part in all of this, there's also the picture of the benefits and the co-benefits. As you mentioned, maybe what is missing is the advisory part also on these benefits, also without the carbon credits. There are also other benefits that are to be highlighted, like, you know, some quantifying accent is key, because in an offset market, even in this market, besides fluctuations in the value, the EU wants to know whether I put in place that package of measures, and I have to know how many credits potentially I can generate. And this is also important for the offset project and its scale. So the big opportunity that is there already is that there are other players like the agro companies, the agro industry, because we have a regulation on sustainable reporting that obliges them to calculate the emissions, those that are linked directly to their productions, but also those that are linked to electricity and electricity source. But actually, type 3 is also important, the upstream and downstream sources, like a tomato processing company would buy tomatoes, and actually the highest share of its emissions would be that of type 3. So how much is all of that, considering 1 kilo or 1 ton of tomatoes? So a regenerative farming project would be set up, and there are different examples, McCain and others that are already acting in this way, that would do so. And so it's not anymore that private contracting, because in type 3 reporting I was referring to, there's not just carbon absorption, because we need to be realistic in terms of the feasibility of all of these practices. We cannot think that all farmers would from one day to the other implement all of the practices. So when I speak about figures, I speak about the possibility of scaling all of this up, because for example, a company has to understand that, like a tomato processing company has to understand how many quintals and so on and so forth. And then the conservative farming and the emissions, all of this can be quantified. And the big challenge is interconnection. We do have digitalization helping us, but you need to enhance all of the pieces of information. So the quality of our data is key. We cannot ask 2 types of farmer to provide us with the data that she has already provided. So we need to make sure that all of this is in place. And in this context, there are opportunities there, and in living labs, of course, will have to understand what is already existing, because there are active projects in Europe, and also allocation, which is another issue, because if you decide to pay farmers so that they adopt this, for example, at ERSAF, but how do we allocate the carbon that was sequestrated from tomatoes and so on and so forth? So allocation is also key, and science can help us out in terms of metrics.
Thank you very much for your answer, especially very rich in terms of allocation, highlighting that dialogue and the interaction is key. But based on what we said, there is something missing. Where is the regulator? What is the regulator's role? at a regional level, it is essential that concrete tools exist to facilitate the adoption of carbon farming practices to take off. So in particular, what tools and initiatives have been put in place by the Lombardy region to support and encourage the adoption of carbon farming practices, and how can local players benefit from them? Yeah, I would like to share the example of the Lombardy region, which I represent. Well, over the past few years, the Lombardy region promoted, designed, and disseminated some tools to promote the adoption of carbon farming practices. I would sum up focusing on three main types of tools. First is Eco Scheme 2. So this is the new CAP, and this ensures payment to farmers adopting carbon farming practices. This tools was activated within the Lombardy region, separating between two types of measure. We have voluntary-based measures, where farmers may decide to adopt carbon farming techniques, reducing emissions and increasing carbon storage. Among them, which have already been mentioned, the no-tillage or strip tillage as well. And so with strip tillage with special important benefit in terms of structuring and having a compact soil and the use of cover crops with all the advantages already proved. And then we have structural measures with more engaging at the beginning, which may bring about specific advantages on medium and long-term horizon. And the Lombardy region has already launched these initiatives for applicants paying for the purchasing of specific equipment for no-tillage or payments for structural interventions. Farmers, of course, may submit a request to the specific authorities of the Lombardy region. Then the second tool you already mentioned, talking about CAP, is AKIS project. That's an innovative tool of the new CAP, Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, targeted to raise awareness, to raise the level of sharing of data, good practices through some channels involving all stakeholders, authorities, research sectors, but also farmers, technicians. And in this context, I would like to share some of the examples already mentioned of the Lombardy region. For instance, we have Living Lab Suolo, who is the father of share of other examples with the Università Cattolica, involving some companies in order to assess the agro-systemic services for a conservative management versus traditional management. Third tool, another activity promoted by the Lombardy region. So being involved in research center, long-term experiments. Help Soil is the founding father or Soil for Life, more dedicated to communication but other projects such as Lilas, the host today, and all these project is giving a contribution somehow to sum up to increase the level of know-how and skills to distribute at different levels. Thank you. Where your answer is, well, rephrasing your answer, we can say that there are tools available, and such event, such today, is meant to spread messages. But then people are supposed to deep dive, to focus more, to assess different possibilities, to enter, to have a better understanding. Anyway, we still have the problem on additionality, because we cannot consider them twice, but this allows us to understand how accurate we must be in the future on what we do and based on what we receive. I go back to Anna, because we have understood that the key element is farming and farmers. We've understood how to try to understand how to raise awareness of farmers. But now let's have another perspective. What about farmers? What do they expect from institutions, from the market, to make carbon farming a real opportunity for farmers themselves, also in relation to the existing political economic framework? It has already been said that farming, agricultural activity, is a business activity, so farmers want to receive revenue, an income on what she do. And I'm talking about carbon credit, which are called environmental certificates, blue certificate. Young farmer in 2006 in Orvieto were already talking about that. 20 years later, many things went forward under many perspectives, political perspective, technical perspective, and the goal is to get to a market of carbon credit. So offsetting, insetting is nothing new. There are so many chains using green claims, and they propose a pathway, and I just give nothing, almost nothing to farmer. But this is not what we are talking about. We would like to be assessed for what we do, and not just food, feed, and energy, and to have this remunerated enough. In that, politics must not and cannot hide themselves behind the finger, using the differences that exist, because politics is deciding. So if we are here because we believed, and when we have seen that there was a European regulation, and we read every single page of the European regulation, well, we expect to have tangible, real regulation, creating a market for carbon credits. And I am looking at Professor Acuti, and I'm happy that he's a part of the project, because we need tangible and positive people. And this is really what we need to get to tangible outcomes. No incentives. Incentives, bonuses is the past. Farmers do not want to receive something because he has not done, because he has not something. She wants to receive a tangible result, tangible remuneration for what she did in terms of food, environment, energy, whatever. And this is what our industrial colleagues already understood. I do not want to get to a point where our industrial friends are purchasing carbon credits to Brazil, because they can purchase carbon credits to Brazil. 1 month ago in Vicenza, and you were there, and Professor Tabaglio was there. There was one person sent by banks with the mandate of understanding how things were going, because he has a big package of carbon credits to be sold coming from Brazil. This is not what we want. We want a securitized carbon credit system, and then decide to use them to sell directly or to sell them in a market, especially on finished product. Thank you. We thank you. I think that this answer is the ultimate sense of what agriculture is asking to institutions and to the market today. So from your crystal clear answer of Anna, I move back. I go back to Paolo Manfredi, and I think industry has an idea about, is it possible to get to this carbon neutrality by 2050? And which technical solutions does the Italian industry consider most promising in a co-development, co-designing process to develop scalable solutions for carbon farming and achieve climate neutrality by 2050? What do you ask us for? Well, some goals that are set, well, it depends if they can be achieved for those who decided for them, based on our estimates to get to the CO2 reduction by 2035, 110 billion euros are required. Trump asked Zelensky $500 billion for 3 years of war. And we also have to think that in the regulations, the last regulation, they talk about technology, carbon retention, so to store it underground. But this is just a pilot project, because they regulate without really knowing reality is. So as for Confindustria, what is certain is what we have just proposed, to have a real coding, and what is mentioned by the European Union as a synergy between culture and agriculture and industry. And Living Lab is a real lab to involve different stakeholders. And I'm also thinking about fertilizers. The fact of experiencing just to have a recovery of, because due to an excess of nitrogen, but there are other possibilities. And I am also thinking about carbon waste that can increase soil fertility, but they must become stable organic residue. So the pathway of a leading lab of such initiatives are essential for another important element. The industrial association is also, especially some sector is sectors are suffering from lack for what is missing from a lack of knowledge, and we have to recover something, and we do not find technicians for soil fertilization, but to preserve soil to increase productivity. Thank you, Paolo. Well, now I would open the debate. I would leave the floor to the audience. So if anyone has questions, I'm asking you to raise your hand. And meanwhile, one communication in the folder, you have a form, you've been given a form to assess the event, and also another form to apply for these living labs. First one is for everybody to assess this event today, and then if you want to join, if you want to apply for living labs, if you want to fill these two forms, there is a path. And when you go out from the Congress Center, before the window, before the exit door, there is a path to leave these two forms. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you. May you introduce yourselves? Erminio Trevisi, professor of Università Cattolica and the president of Cerezo, the field farm of Università Cattolica. I deal with living stocks, and sometimes it was mentioned that the first element that we should use is, so to speak, waste. And we have this approach. I'm thinking about manure. And in the last intervention, you mentioned about the possibility of using other substances to increase carbon intake, but actually we should make heavier, more complicated controls for heavy metal, for instance, that can jeopardize soil wealth. So my point, why don't we put the sources of organic matter at the center, which may solve some other transversal problems? I mean, why don't we tackle the problem in a more holistic approach, understanding that agriculture is farming and livestock. Another element, and I stop there, is the market, carbon credit market. Are we sure that such a market is an added value for an agriculture, not making agriculture as a vassal of economics? And if we are doing this calculation, I am supposed to do 3,500 euros, but who is able to take on such responsibility for no income, because 3,500 euros is no income? From the ethic perspective, it's something else, but we said that farms are business companies. So if there is money coming in, it must be worth doing that with a commitment of an entrepreneur and the final outcome. Otherwise, I fear that we are destroying an agricultural network that we have created over time, even if by making mistakes.
Of course, zootechnics is 100% part of the agriculture world, livestock breeding as well. And the use of the residues from livestock. This is also included. Maybe it was not clear, but it was included in all of our discourse this morning. But the fact that I have to have costs to produce carbon credits, no, because sometimes you reduce costs and you get benefits. I buy, for example, a small tractor. Might be that I'll have to pay more for a sewing machine, but I don't need other systems or machines anymore. So the cost is there. I mean, the first objective is improving efficiency, reducing costs, improving productions, and improving environmental impact. Why are we doing so? Because maybe we're using digestate better in a better way, or manure in a better way. So if we continue on reasoning around how much would it cost to get carbon credits, then we won't get anywhere. But regenerative farming, or whatever you want to call it, you know, following a series of practices that might provide primary benefits, well, carbon credit is a collateral sort of benefit that you get. Thank you, Marco. I would like to add one observation. When we focus on all of these advantages, we call them co-benefits. I don't like this term because the main objective is that of advantages in terms of cost reductions, but also in terms of soil fertility, i.e. the capability of soil to sustain farming and good crops. So we'll see how all of the things will move on, and we'll have to get ready for it. I would like to add one comment. I also see this as a very good opportunity for a change in the paradigm. And in terms of the world that we live in as citizens as well. So let's exploit this opportunity. It's a very precious opportunity that we are faced with. We should seize this opportunity. Any other questions on the part of the audience? There's a question over there. Good morning. I'm Cremonesi Lorenzo, Consorzio Agrario Terre Padane. In the last year, we've been carrying out on the field carbon farming research works. One trying and focusing on giving a figure to these carbon credits, reducing MRV costs, and another one instead wants to sort of be like a showcase. So we will try and apply a carbon farming program, and we try and understand the potential and the possible opportunities for the future. During this conference, actually, I had some questions. One that is linked to what has been just said. Do you think that it is fundamental to have a farmer aggregator, like an interface between the farming world and the industrial world, so as to reduce the costs of putting all of these practices in place, and maybe also increasing the price of the carbon credits that companies can obtain? Second question, what is, in your opinion, the best business model or governance model for a carbon farming program? Thank you. Well, in terms of the aggregation, this is a matter of scalability that comes with it. So we're talking about numbers that are turned into an economic value. So rightly enough, Lorenzo mentioned all of this because yes, we've spoken about practices and profitability, but then there are rules and procedures if we want to be certified. So a living lab, and I go back to your question, has also a role of identifying roles and responsibilities. So the role of the company carrying out all of the measurements on the soil, the role of a cooperative, because there are already many cooperatives that are offering interesting prices for, you know, the certification. In the Cloud Marble project, for example, we are in contact with them, and we saw that actually the price per ton is already high because the consortium is offering services that are needed to this technology transfer. Machines and pieces of equipment were mentioned before. We organize evenings with the farmers. We offer them dinner and to drink, and we then chat together and let them understand what all of this means in concrete terms. You need to have like technical support. Farmers need to have a technical support to understand all of the benefits. And then millions of euros have been invested with the Industry 4.0 program. Let's exploit all of that. It's an immediate net value, because if carbon is not a certain persistent, then that is a risk. And you need to enhance all of this. So a business model. And then, of course, we have a different financing mechanisms. And so the consortia, like other realities, e-agronom in Eastern Europe, all of these realities are able to convey knowledge to farmers, but also acting as a central another question. We still have time for a couple of more questions. Pierluigi Patenda, of the Cooperative Agricole, so farmer cooperative. Very interesting topics, but we've been discussing already in the past about all of this. But I have the feeling that when this legislation then is approved, and you know, we will buy fertilizers that we import, paying an additional cost for credit, because this is already happening at the customs administrations. But if we as farmers do not recognize these carbon credits, then we will have issues. This is what worries me, because I'm producing mass dry matter, besides including carbon in the soil. So this is my perplexity. Well, I mean, in these mechanisms, there are different facets in terms of their meaning, and we have understood this. We are now in the definition stage, and every time a path is being defined, there are risks that we should try and mitigate as much as possible. What you mentioned about fertilizers, It's the same with the other issues and aspects that might put a burden in terms of emissions for farmers. But seeing it from the view of the living lab, it's also going back to what was said before, the consortia may be where different farming companies join together. Well, they can collaborate, because yes, there are worries. There is an evolution in the legislation that can have certain consequences that we might be worried about, because I'm also worried about what you say. There are also other possible issues, and all of this should be analyzed at a living lab level. And institutions must also be present in this discussion, because when we have an issue that triggers worries that might lead to a decrease in the willingness of the farmers to adhere to carbon farming, then this is a problem. And so this is key and fundamental. Other comments? Mr. Grandi, an agronomist. I heard today you talking about carbon credit with a like-minded sort of attitude, as if everyone could get access to that. But we need to understand better what carbon credit is. Because this is a credit if you are capturing or you are not releasing carbon. So this still has not been coded properly, and it's not true that all crops might lead to carbon credits. Maybe with pro-pat farming management, it could be that you can sort of balance those carbon credits that you cannot get also through technology. And I'm thinking about rice and tomatoes. Today, I've not heard you mentioning objectives. Still, there are no reduction objectives from now to 2035. Today, this has not been mentioned, and I have not found them in any legislation. So we will have to see all of this also in terms of the willingness of politicians in bringing forward this farming policy. Because if I ask today, what's the worth of a carbon credit? Can you tell that to me with certainty? How much is worth? Because they are on a voluntary basis. And this being on a voluntary basis, this means that maybe the legislation is not imposing all of this. So today's value cannot be considered for any calculation regarding the future. The value that we will have in the future will be strictly correlated to the sanctions that will be imposed by the lawmaker. And of course, this value will be lower than the sanction imposed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be meaningful. Thank you. Well, I would like just to make a comment on the first part. because we mentioned carbon farming. And one of the components of the message here is the fact that we've always expected, and we're still expecting a lot from these carbon credits, maybe too much. But the truth, as it emerged in our discussions, is that maybe, yes, we see this sort of slide with carbon credit written on it, but we need to understand what's behind it. So this is my comment. So I do agree with you. If someone else wants to add something.
Well, I mentioned the fact that rice and tomato have been mentioned as driving crops, but there are also other practices. But I understand you mentioned tomatoes, which we are creating a standardized baseline for the province of Piacenza. We are losing half a ton per hectare a year, but there are other crops and practices which are part of this approach to offset these losses. But the baseline is essential. The baseline approach is the approach that we want to make standard, because we cannot have an input data and have a specific baseline per field. Maybe in 10 years when everything will be digital, but according to me, and this is my message as a Marvic project, we cannot accept a standardized baseline with the granulometry of 20 kilometers, because if in Parma I do alfalfa and tomato, we have the same baseline. That's unthinkable. That's unconceivable. As per figures, SBTIs, many Italian and European agro industry are setting figures, and they are setting up their carbon farming projects and the carbon and regenerative agricultural project. But it's difficult to think that there will be a fixed reduction imposed by the European authorities. While figures, yeah, there are figures, but these are voluntary based, as Professor Acutis said, in terms of Euroton. Thank you. We are 20 minutes after the closing time, so if it is fine for you, we can leave any other interaction for the buffet lunch waiting for us right outside. Well, to conclude this morning, just a couple of words. First of all, I would like to say thank you all those who collaborated on the organization of this event for this very rich and fruitful debate. This morning we had the opportunity of having the state of the art on carbon farming from different perspectives. And this is very interesting. The institutions perspective, research, farmers, and industrial perspective. And we have understood that the transition towards an agriculture contributing to climate neutrality in the ways we have been indicated, this is not an easy pathway, but this is a challenge that we can take up only if we have concrete tools, shared vision, and collaboration among all the stakeholders that are involved outside the supply chain. Interesting comments on the role of research, regional policies, but above all on the need to involve farmers in a clear, active, and effective way. Of course, living labs may represent a winning example for experiments in real context, in real scenarios, adjusting them to specific scenario. We have talked about specific cases, ensuring scalable and participatory involvement. The main takeaway message is that positive economic outcomes of carbon farming should not and must not be researched only in the value, the economic value of credit carbon, but on the positive externalities that carbon farming will generate, both for farmers but also for the civil society. And this must be acknowledged and enhanced. But in order to have a real take-off of carbon farming, we need accessible financial tool and an endless dialogue between research institutions, farmers, companies, and the civil society, which is the missing component, the stakeholder who was not here. And I agree with you, this is not true, because we are the civil society ourselves. We are meant to contribute under our professional and technical know-how, just to be protagonist of a more aware society involved in the decisions that will shape the future of our territory. Now the challenge is to turn this idea into tangible actions. So I invite you to continue this debate also after this roundtable, to create synergies and to actively contribute to the growth within our living lab, within our carbon farming practices. So I invite you to fill the form, the letter of intention to join share, and the enrollment for farmers of 10 extra demo sites, and 1 year after, for the next 4 years, once a year, there will be more targeted workshops, just creating technical table and breakout sessions to discuss about the most relevant topics. So if you want, you will be able to give your own contribution in this pathway we just began. And now I would like to say thank you to our panelists of the first session and the panelists that are here with me in this roundtable. And thank you to you all for being here and for your attention. Thank you very much. See you soon.